Welcome in to the Irish NFL show as we continue our look at the continuous storylines around the league. Pro days taking place. We've just come to the end of free agency. We're slowly entering draft season. And with that, I have Steve Wyche returning to the Irish NFL show from NFL Network. Steve, you're a regular at this stage. I think this is the third time, three years.
Hey, man, I love it. I'm so glad you guys have welcomed me back. Hopefully I see you in person when the game is over there this fall. I'm really looking forward to it because I always wanted to go over there. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we did meet briefly in Radio Row, and the first thing you said to me was, I really hope some way I can maneuver a few tables and a few meetings to get myself on that plane to Dublin. It's good. Look, I was going to kind of finish the show with that for sure. Why not? Let's start there. It's truly fantastic news for Irish fans, and it's long overdue. We've been looking at all the games in the UK, Germany, obviously Madrid has a game coming this season. It just kind of goes to show the enormity of where the league is. But I live 15 minutes from the stadium. It's going to be a unique occasion, and it'll be a week-long occasion, similar to when you go out to the Super Bowl at Radio Road. There's going to be numerous events taking place around the city. It's fantastic, and a great team to bring over as well. Steelers have been bought into the Irish experience for quite some time with the Rooney family.
Yeah, I mean, look, the perfect team. We know the Irish sports fans are insane, so they're going to embrace this. They're going to enjoy it. It gives us all another reason to kind of party, right, and to celebrate. So, again, it's going to be a great experience because, you talk about all those places where the NFL has been, but there have been college football games over in Ireland for what now, 15 years or so?
Yeah. So
it's about time the NFL shows up.
Yeah, week 0 of the college season, as they call it, as opposed to week 1, always kicks off last weekend in August, first game in the Aviva Stadium, which is a different stadium within the city, and that's always a fantastic experience. And I think with Notre Dame were here 2 years ago, and that was a complete sellout. And I think mass exodus of fans leaving the States to come over to Ireland, truly fantastic weekend. We're well used to it now. We're looking forward to it. I did interview Dan Rooney. He was over here last week in the stadium itself. They were doing an event, a flag football event. And he says he can't wait to see all those terrible towels across the stadium from late September, early October, depending on the date in question. But it's really, it's fantastic. It's well deserved for the Irish fans, and it's well deserved for the people who, I suppose, who follow the game and invest so much time, and like ourselves, going over to the Super Bowls and all the various different games. So to have it on our doorstep, it's fantastic.
Good.
I'm going to kick off with Cam Ward, if you don't mind. And
sure.
We're only, I suppose, 24 hours removed from his pro day. And
yeah,
I think first of all, I'd say, are we getting to the stage? I remember asking you a question last year around the enormity of players going to the draft and how the NFL are starting to scale down. And you touched on the point that they don't want exposure on these players for all the wrong reasons, in terms of sitting in the green room and the pressure that comes with waiting to be selected. And we've seen over the course of the last couple of years, in particular, the combine, and how, I wouldn't say it's watered down, but players aren't throwing anymore. It's more about the pro day. Are we getting to the stage full circle where it's all about the pro day now?
More and more, because you can control the environment a little bit more, right? If a quarterback is going to throw at his pro day, he can throw to receivers he's been playing with for several years. Whereas the combine, it's foreign receivers, different speed of guys. They run their routes differently. So you might not have a good day. It's all part of the evaluation process. I just think that ever since the lockdown, it's changed. There were always players who did not participate, but ever since lockdown, people are like, you know what? Let me just do at my pro day this and that. And some evaluators used to say, well, they don't want to compete, so I don't really like that. Then they step back and say, like, that's dumb. These guys can compete at their pro day. They have all these years of film of them actually playing on the field. Let me just stand back. So it's becoming more and more accepted. At the same time, the combine, the interviews, all of the kind of get to know you tools that are in place are highly important. That the medical stuff that happens there. So there is a purpose for it. Again, the majority of people overwhelmingly participate, but the pro days, because you can control the atmosphere and the environment and the workout, that's really where a lot of the primary focus is turned.
Is that kind of lend into the unfortunate circumstance that Will Howard of Ohio State kind of dealt with, because people were so down on him after his pro day, but after his combine appearance. But I imagine when he does his pro day and he's got familiarity in terms of the location, the players around him, we might see a much more established performance come that day.
That's happened for years. There's so many guys who like let's say you're a Shedeur Sanders, right? I'm just using him as an example. Those guys have been on so many marketing tours and Heisman tours and things like that. They call it the buffet tour, right? Where you're just eating food, you're on airplanes. So you're not training like you normally train. So you might show up at the combine not in optimum shape. Whereas at your pro day, you know, okay, my pro day is on this date. I've done all the celebratory things that I've been asked to do or required to do. I can have a full run up of 5 or 6 weeks before my pro day. And, you know, so that's part of it as well. Everyone has his reason as to why he doesn't want to participate or does want to participate. But there's all these factors that more and more NFL team evaluators are understanding, whereas before, again, it would rub some of them the wrong way.
And coming out of yesterday's pro day, like if you read the reports today, since then, there's going to be another evaluation of Cam Ward by the Titans in a private workout, essentially. And all the storylines seem to be that they're convinced now he is the number one selection. And I'm reluctant to say it's a foregone conclusion because I recall a couple of years ago, and you'll remember this one where it looked like CJ Stroud was going one, and they were talking about high-fiving and we'll play basketball together in a couple of months down in Carolina, only for Bryce Young to be the selection. But it certainly seems like we're going in that general direction right now.
It really does. And you can tell the fact that the Titans did not get involved in free agency at the quarterback position, right? So that lets you know, okay, we're going to draft one of these young guys. We have a head coach whose specialty supposedly is developing a young quarterback, right? So now let's get the best one. And a lot of people, you know, their only real thought or vision of Cam Ward is what he did at Miami this year, which was great. But remember, he was at Washington State University for 4 years where he did great things there as well. So this is somebody who has started a lot of games, who's won a lot of games, who's performed well on big stages for a lot of games. So all of those things kind of factor into the evaluation. And that's something that's changed over the past couple of years. Like remember when Anthony Richardson came out of the University of Florida with only 13 starts? Well, he's a developmental guy. Well, they start him right away. And guess what? They realize he's a developmental guy. He's not ready. But Brock Purdy, the last pick of the draft, he played all this football for 4 years at Iowa State. He comes in, he's ready right away. So I think the fact that Cam Ward has played so much football and Shedeur Sanders has played so much football on the collegiate level at high performance levels, that's going to ease some of the potential concerns on their ability to transition to the NFL in big markets and perform right away.
That brings me to Sanders, because every year, it's not necessarily a quarterback, there's always a player or numerous players in which, for whatever reason, come the combine or thereafter, there's unfortunate storylines. And sometimes I wonder, is a certain team trying to push him down the board so ultimately he falls into their lap at 10 in the team, shall we say. But you just touched on it there. Like Sanders has elevated Colorado. He's come from a previous collision where he's elevated that particular team, you know, and they win 9 games last year. I recall Colorado's over-under was 4.5 games, and he wins 9 games. He wins 9 games, and yet people now are trying to, I wouldn't say they're trying to push him down the board, but there is these concerns. Is it really more focused around Dion? Because you listen to his son, and he has the arrogance, but is it not better to have that arrogant quarterback come in to a certain extent rather than a guy that's going to be a bit more kind of prohibitive around how he wants to perceive himself?
It really all depends, because you've had the quiet type. Like Justin Herbert is he's a rather quiet to himself guy, and he's a great player, right? Whereas some of the other guys like Joe Burrow's got a little bit of that stuff to him, right? And he's a really good player. Lamar Jackson's a quiet guy. You know, Patrick Mahomes is a relatively quiet guy, even though you see him on a million commercials. But when they're on the field, they're different. They're different characters. And so one thing with Shedeur is he's grown up with this, right? He's grown up with dad. He's met every celebrity there is to meet. He's met every great athlete there is to meet. He's met half of the coaches who are in the NFL. And so there's really nothing that should overwhelm him, right? That's something like, let's say he goes to the New York market with the Giants, right? That city and that media should not overwhelm him because he's grown up around it. You never know, you know, because he hasn't grown up losing, right? If you get on a team, which usually when you're a high draft pick, you're going to a bad team, you can lose. Okay, now what's that going to do to challenge your character? What's that going to do to challenge your public persona? We'll see. But the fact that Shedeur has always been a quarterback, he's learned how to play the position well from a father whose job it was to slow down quarterbacks. There are just certain intangibles that on the surface seem like will serve him well when he transitions to the NFL.
If he does end up in Cleveland, which is a very different demographic to New York, as a Giants fan, I know 100% about the New York media and listen to them daily, but would there be a sense that there would be immediate pressure because of the level of investment they did with Deshaun Watson, and that trade essentially has not worked out, that they will say we need to have an impact very quickly in order to get ourselves back on an even keel and work into the future again?
That's a great question. I don't think it so much falls on the fact that the investment they've made into Deshaun Watson, even though he would be on a rookie contract, which makes it affordable to have all that money tied up into one position. But I think it's the fact that they convinced Myles Garrett to stay. The money was great, but he wants to win. He's made enough money. He wants to win. So there's something they said to him. Said, here's our plan. We want you to be part of the solution. Okay. And so I think it's more of the age of their team, of some of their really good players. Joel Bitonio, some guys in our offensive line are older, but you've also got the emergence of a wide receiver like Jerry Jeudy. And you also have an owners in Jimmy and Dee Haslam, who so badly want to bring success to the city that has just suffered for decades. We've seen the list of the 25 quarterbacks who've been there since they came back in the 90s. It's been a disaster. And so if Shedeur comes in, yes, there's going to be the initial wave of, okay, now you've got the star young quarterback. What does this mean for the veteran quarterback who's making all this money? But soon you got to play, right? And if you can play, that's all that matters. If you can't play and you get added to that heap of worn jerseys of the Cleveland Browns quarterbacks who basically have met their maker playing for them. But, you've been to the States. That fan base in Cleveland, for as much suffering as they have been put through, is as loyal and as dedicated and committed of a fan base as there is in the league. I mean, they are an amazing fan base. So if Shedeur were to go there and perform well, he'll be bigger than LeBron James was when LeBron played for the Cavaliers there.
Usually by now we have a transaction or two in terms of a trade in the first round. I think we're dating back to 1993. I think it was 15 then when we've last, in terms of the enormity of how long we've gone without a first round trade. And I think Joe Montana happened to be the one 5 days beforehand back then. But are you surprised at the lack of movement so far? Do you think this could heat up? Because I remember going into the draft last year, the first 10 picks essentially went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and so on. And there was a huge talk going into the draft on the night. Now, I know we're 4 weeks away, give or take 4. On that particular night, everyone expected a numerous trades within the top 10 and nothing transpired. And here we are with no trades whatsoever. Do you think it'll heat up potentially over coming weeks?
I think it could, but the fact there's not 4 or 5 quarterbacks that people want to get to, like next year, they're saying the pool of quarterbacks is insane. Like, this is not the year to have a high pick. Next year will be that year. I think the fact that there's not a ton of quarterbacks, we saw this a couple of years ago, though, where there was only 2 quarterbacks people were talking about, and that was Jared Goff and Carson Wentz. Yeah. And I remember 2 teams traded up to get there. The Rams came all the way from like 15.
13.
Right, to get up to number 1. Yeah. And then the Eagles came up to get Wentz at 2. And so I think teams are kind of waiting to see how this settles, because the majority of their teams – outside of the top 3 for the most part, and the Steelers, don't have a quarterback. And I think the Aaron Rodgers domino will settle some of that as to whether there's going to be trades or not. But I think there's so many players at other key positions that you didn't see addressed in free agency. Offensive line, edge rusher, defensive back, wide receiver. Like, there's all of this great talent out there where teams are like, cool, we'll sit here at 14 or 16 or 22, and we'll take whichever one of those players falls to us, because there's just going to be so much talent, because they're so deep at non-quarterback positions. We might not need to move up. So it might not be until like the day before, the day of the first round, before we see some action.
I wonder if the Patriots are sitting pretty at 4, bear in mind, again, mock drafts, everything can be different, but Hunter would be a player essentially that can do 2 jobs. Obviously, they'll have to manage his game. His games, obviously, he looks like he'd be cornerback initially, and then obviously they'll sprinkle him in on the offense. But are they in for a huge treat if they can get him?
Absolutely. I think they would use him at wide receiver because remember they have
Okay.
Christian Gonzalez and they went out and they signed Dean from Detroit. So
Yeah.
I think they, who knows what they would do, but that's a team because it is so bereft of talent. You talk about a bare cabinet other than quarterback and a couple of positions. They're sitting so pretty at 4, like you said, they could take any position. They need offensive linemen more than anything. They need offensive line. That offensive line's terrible. But if there's a great edge rusher or if Travis Hunter is right, you can't pass on that type of generational talent. If Abdul Carter, the edge rusher from Penn State, is there, you take him and you address the offensive line later. You trade up, you do whatever, but you don't pass on a generational talent. So, again, I think the Patriots are in a great, great position to build up a roster where there's so many needs.
I just want to ask you about the Raiders. I know that there's a huge contingent of Raiders fans in here. Sorry, in Ireland. And someone asked me when I'm talking to them, well, you never tend to ask Raiders questions. So I got to give them their due. And obviously, it was very clear from day one. Essentially, once the combine came around, they were very active in terms of trying to secure Matthew Stafford. Didn't play out that way. If you read the reports, they were ahead of the pecking order on the Giants. Whilst both teams offered the same packages, give or take, on salaries. Ultimately, if he had left the Rams, he may have gone to the Raiders. And then they quickly pivot and bring in Geno. Is that for you because where they're sitting? Well, it doesn't look like they're sitting that far back. Ultimately, probably recognize very quickly 1, 2, 3. The two quarterbacks are going to go effectively 1, 2, 3 within that particular. And realistically, they're going to have to go get a seasoned veteran in. And Geno, in his own way, is a good one to bring in.
Well, he's a good one because he's affiliated with the coach, Pete Carroll.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I remember Pete Carroll had him in Seattle, and that's when Geno really played well. So there's that familiarity. Pete Carroll is like, okay, if we don't need the greatest quarterback in the world, but we need somebody who can do what we want to do, which is to run the football. Right. So then they go out and they add some pieces on defense, a defense that was actually halfway decent last year with all of the injuries they had, including Max Crosby playing nicked up on that leg all year. And so they can go in a lot of directions. Pete Carroll always drafted in Seattle who you didn't expect them to draft.
Yeah.
So a lot of people right now are pushing Ashton Jeanty, the running back out of Boise State, who's a superstar, to the Raiders, which means that Pete Carroll was probably going to draft like a defensive back or, they need some help at wide receiver, right? They could always add offensive linemen because Pete wants to run the ball. There's a lot of different ways they can go. I would not be surprised if they even moved back, if they traded back to add to it, because like I talked about earlier, there's just so many position groups where there's so much depth of talent that it could really help out a team like the Raiders. But if you can get a game breaker like a Jeanty, someone like him, Pete Carroll loves his running backs. He always, even though he had Marshawn Lynch, he always drafted other guys, some in the first round. Like remember when he drafted Rashad Penny at the end of the first round. Just remember in Seattle, he wasn't drafting at 6. He was drafting like in the late 20s.
And Jeanty for me kind of struck out with some of the Bears around 9 could potentially look at because they've done so much work this offseason in trying to bolster the offensive line, which has been a really bugbear for Bears fans for quite some time. And they're doing their utmost to put players around Williams. They traded very quickly in the offseason to bring in players. He looks like the obvious one. Bearing in mind what they're trying to do to secure an offensive line for the quarterback, but also have a dominant running back that could come in and be an explosive player for them. I can't recall. Matt Forte maybe was the last one they've had at that level of explosiveness. Really? And we're going back that
Dave Montgomery had a couple good years there.
Yeah, true.
But not. Here's why I think Jeanty would make sense there, because who's their new coach? Ben Johnson. Where did he come from? Detroit. What did Detroit do? They went 2 running backs. You remember Dave Montgomery for a while, DeAndre Swift, who's in Chicago now.
Sonic and Knuckles.
Right. And then it came with Jahmyr Gibbs. Right. And so that's why I think a lot of people are connecting those dots. There's a lot of directions the Bears can go. They can go wide receiver. They can add to their defense. And I wouldn't be surprised if they even went back and doubled down on offensive linemen, because some of the linemen they went and got are older. Yeah. So you get a young guy in there as well to develop him. Again, Ben Johnson comes from the Lions. What do the Lions do? They drafted offensive lineman after offensive lineman after offensive lineman. They built through the trenches. So, running back, offensive line, wouldn't shock me at all if they kind of replicated positions that they already have.
On the day of the Super Bowl, when we were traveling out to the stadium, it was announced by your colleagues in NFL Network that Aaron Rodgers was essentially parting ways with the Jets. And excuse me, I suppose it probably didn't come as a surprise, but it probably has come as a surprise that this free agency wave has turned into Rodgers' watch, because people probably didn't feel that was going to be the case. Probably felt he'd be a little bit different in his mannerism around selecting a team because of the nature of how it ended for him for the Jets. But he's very cautious. He's taking his time. And I recall that particular day as a Giants fan saying to the guys on the bus out to the stadium, it would make a ton of sense for the Giants to draft a quarterback and try bringing Aaron Rodgers. I didn't think they'd have the level of demand in which he has now. Obviously, I didn't foresee the Steelers coming into the equation at that stage. But are you surprised at how long it's playing out? And I wouldn't say what's holding it up, because I think we're all very much aware how Rodgers does things now. It's fact finding, sit down, piece the information together, and then help you make that decision. Where do you see that, or is there a longevity to this that we maybe here come to draft still waiting this final decision from?
I would think so, because I think retirement is still very much on the table, more so than it had been the last 2 years, right? 2 years ago, he wanted to go play and show the Packers, hey, I can win without you. Well, that didn't work. He gets hurt. So now he wants to say, hey, I want to come back and play healthy, right? No athlete ever wants his career to end via an injury. Now he's kind of like, well, do I really want to go to a situation that's not healthy, right? And right now it's like the Steelers and the Giants. I don't think the Cleveland Browns are in play. Everyone else kind of has their situation rectified, whether you're the Titans, you're going to draft a quarterback, whether you're the Giants or the Browns, you're going to draft a quarterback. So the Steelers, again, that's a relatively healthy situation. You know what you're getting when you go to the organization. But does he want to play there? Does he want to play for the coordinator? Does he want to play with DK Metcalf and George Pickens? Looks appetizing, but Aaron thinks differently. He's a wise veteran. So I think he may say, look, let me see if I want to go do this for 1 year, or if I just want to go ahead and hang it up and go live my life the way I want to live it, out of the public eye, whatever. So I think because retirement is so much of a viable option, this won't be rushed. But I do think some teams will, like the Steelers, whatnot, will rectify their situation before the draft. They've got to do something if they're not going to be in position to draft a quarterback.
Do you? I don't. Let's double down very quick. Do you see both teams essentially giving them a deadline? Do you think that's possible that they'll say
they probably will? They probably will without giving him a deadline. Yeah. Just kind of saying, look, we've got to do something. I mean, if Shedeur Sanders is sitting there for the Giants at 3 and they like him, they're going to draft him. Okay, well, that narrows down the options for Aaron Rodgers. Maybe it tells him, okay, I'm going to go ahead and sign with Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh's like, yeah, we need to get Aaron Rodgers in here right now. Or else Pittsburgh may say, you know what? We're going to go ahead and just go with Mason Rudolph. We'll draft a quarterback, a Jackson Dart or a Milroe out of Alabama, try to develop him. And if we strike out with both of those, we'll get back at it next year. I don't think Pittsburgh's of that mindset, because you have aging veterans like a Cam Hayward, TJ Watt's still in his prime. You want to capitalize on that and stop kicking that can down the road trying to find a quarterback, because they got caught in it last year. They're going to have to recycle it again after this year if they go the Aaron Rodgers route. So they're in a very, very precarious situation. This is a tough spot to be in if you're the Steelers.
Just want to close out with the league meetings this coming weekend, and in particular rule changes. And you know yourself, I'm sure you've discussed it. Some will feel this is a justifiable challenge in terms of teams trying to overturn certain rules that are in the league. Anyone in particular that you would be keen to see? Like, for example, the one the Lions are pushing in terms of 3rd and 70 and whatever 2nd and 12, and there's a hold by the defense or the cornerback, and it's an automatic first down. And I've seen some examples, just give them the 5 or 10 yards and then replay it down. That's the type of thing they're chasing. Do you think is there anything in particular that's viable that would actually get past this weekend?
I don't think that'll get past, because the NFL loves offense, and so you can give a team a first down for something like that to keep the offense on the field. I think that sticks. The conversation about the tush push, I don't think goes any further than a conversation. When it comes to the rules, I honestly don't think, other than maybe some technicalities like putting the chip in the ball to spot the first down, maybe using a different camera angle to help with some of the reviews.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't think there's going to be anything seismic. And it's about time the NFL stops adding to the book and just let things kind of settle for a few years. Things are good right now. There's nothing out there that's overly controversial or that's harming a team, other than maybe I think there's making the face mask penalty reviewable. I think that's going to get a lot of discussion, but I don't think it's going to be anything significant.
One that's been proposed, which isn't necessarily on the field, I suppose it's on the field in terms of the enormity of a season, is that they're looking at, I don't think it'll be passed either. I don't think it will ever be passed, which is the one around potentially reviewing the seeding within the AFC and the NFC. For example, if you win a division and you have a poor record, i.e. Panthers or the Commanders a couple of years ago when they played the Bucs at home, was the Bucs had a better record. What's your thoughts on that one? Because from a fan base perspective, we've had numerous people say to us, when we're at games, when is this ever going to get looked at? It's unfair for a team such as the Vikings this year who win 14 games and they have to go on the road to play against the Rams. In fact, they didn't even play in SoFi in the end, but that was other circumstances, unfortunate circumstances. But do you ever see a scenario where this will get adjusted or moved?
No. No, there's not one owner who's going to give up a home game.
Yeah.
Even if your team wins 9 games to win the division and you go 9-8, you are going to get an additional home game to generate revenue in your stadium. So, you're not going to have to pay certain travel costs for a week for your whole organization to go to a playoff game. So there's no way any owner is going to forsake and vote for that rule. That's dead on arrival.
Well, Steve, you've been very generous with your time as always. You mentioned travel costs there. Hopefully the NFL Network team will find travel costs to send you over to Dublin come next season for the big game. We really appreciate your time as always. You're always so generous, and thanks again. We look forward to having you on soon.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it and hope to see you in the fall.